He built the Red Army from nothing. He inspired soldiers to weep with his speeches. He turned a mob into a winning force. And when Vladimir Lenin, the father of Soviet Russia, lay dying, virtually every observer inside and outside the Soviet Union assumed the same thing. Leon Trotsky was next. So, how did he lose everything? How did one of history's brilliant minds get outmaneuvered and hunted down? Let's go back to 1917. Russia was in chaos. The old Tsar's rule had collapsed. Into that vacuum stepped Bolshevik revolutionaries, led by Vladimir Lenin. But Lenin didn't do it alone. At his side was Leon Davidovich Bronstein, better known as Leon Trotsky. Born in 1879, Trotsky embraced Marxism as a teen, was arrested, exiled, escaped, and moved through underground networks. By the time revolution came, he was ready. During the October Revolution of 1917, while Lenin was still returning from exile, it was Trotsky directing operations, coordinating the seizure of power in Petrograd. Then, the achievement that defined him, Trotsky became Commissar of War in 1918 and built the Red Army. Not reformed it, he built it from scratch. Russia's old military had been shattered by World War I and the Revolution. Trotsky took the remnants, exhausted and demoralized, and turned them into a force that defeated the White Army and foreign intervention forces over 3 brutal years of civil war. He personally rode armored trains from front to front, inspiring troops and making decisions on the spot. By the early 1920s, American journalist Max Eastman reported something remarkable. He wrote in Foreign Affairs that in 1922, Trotsky was more popular among the masses than Lenin himself. More popular than Lenin. He was an extraordinary orator, a serious intellectual, a writer whose history of the Russian Revolution would be read for generations. He spoke in packed halls and the crowds were moved. When Lenin began suffering strokes in 1922, when it became clear the Soviet Union would need new leadership, Lenin himself offered Trotsky the position of deputy chairman of the Council of People's Commissars. A public signal that this man was his successor. But Trotsky turned it down. He actually turned it down twice. That decision is where this story starts to crack. Now let's talk about the man nobody was watching. In 1922, the position of General Secretary of the Communist Party was filled by Joseph Stalin, a Georgian-born Bolshevik. At the time, almost nobody thought this role mattered. John Reed, the American journalist who wrote 10 Days That Shook the World, one of the definitive accounts of the revolution, barely mentioned Stalin. He was seen as a secondary figure, useful for organizational tasks, that prominent Bolsheviks didn't want to deal with. That was the perception. Here's the reality. The General Secretary role gave Stalin complete control over party appointments, who got promoted, who got assigned to which committee, who sat in which room when decisions were made. He could fill the org bureau with loyal allies. He could quietly shift power away from rivals and toward people he owned. Stalin understood something Trotsky didn't. In a one-party state, the party is everything. And whoever controls the machinery of the party controls the party itself. While Trotsky was thinking about global revolution and Marxist theory, Stalin was making phone calls. While Trotsky was preparing speeches, Stalin was counting votes. And while Trotsky was recovering from illness in the Caucasus in late 1922 and 1923, Stalin was building something Trotsky didn't have, a machine. And while that machine was being built quietly and methodically, the one man who might have stopped it was running out of time. Lenin knew something was wrong. In December 1922, confined by his deteriorating health, Lenin began dictating what history now calls his testament, assessing leadership and his fears for the future. In January 1923, he added a postscript, and that postscript is where things got serious. He wasn't kind to anyone, but he reserved special attention for 2 men. Of Trotsky, he said he was perhaps the most capable man in the present Central Committee, but warned of his excessive self-assurance. Of Stalin, he was more alarmed. He wrote that Stalin had accumulated too much power and could not be trusted with it, and proposed the comrades find a way to remove Stalin from that position. Remove him. Lenin, in his final months, was trying to fire Stalin. Then, on March 9, 1923, Lenin suffered his third and most devastating stroke. He never recovered politically. He died on January 21, 1924. The man who might have kept Stalin in check was gone. What followed was not a debate about ideas. It was a power game, and it moved fast. Stalin had already, in May 1922, formed an alliance with two other Politburo members, Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev. Together, this troika had one goal: stop Trotsky from succeeding Lenin. They agreed to suppress Lenin's testament and present a united front, systematically cutting Trotsky off from power. Then came Lenin's funeral. Stalin organized it. Stalin carried the coffin. Stalin delivered a public oath to continue Lenin's work with almost religious solemnity. It was theater, but effective theater. Trotsky wasn't there. He was in the Caucasus, recovering from illness. He received a telegram from Stalin informing him of the timing and saying there was no point making the long trip back to Moscow. Trotsky claimed Stalin deliberately gave him the wrong date. Whether that's true or not, and the evidence strongly suggests it, it didn't matter. The optics were already set. Lenin was dead and Trotsky was absent. For party members watching, the message was clear. Stalin mourned. Stalin honored Lenin. Trotsky was not there. That absence cost him more than he ever publicly acknowledged. But the funeral wasn't a single mistake in an otherwise sound strategy. It was a symptom of something deeper, a pattern of misjudgments that had been building for years. Here's where we have to be direct, because Trotsky wasn't simply outplayed. He contributed to his own defeat in ways that even sympathetic historians can't explain away. Let's first consider his personal character. By most accounts, Trotsky was exceptionally intelligent. He was aware of his own brilliance and ensured others recognized it. Angelika Balabanov, a prominent figure in the Communist International who knew Trotsky well, stated it quite directly. She described his ego as matching his talents, creating a significant distance from those around him. This prevented both genuine warmth and any sense of equality. When his first wife, Alexandra Sokolovskaya, who had been arrested and exiled with him and bore his children, was asked about his notorious pride, her response was telling. Arrogance would be a more fitting term than pride, she implied. Even Lenin, his strongest ally, found this trait off-putting. Lenin's testament contained more than just praise for Trotsky. It specifically identified his excessive confidence as a major political weakness. Within a party comprised of individuals who had dedicated decades to risking their lives for a cause, Trotsky had a way of making others feel insignificant. And this is a crucial point. When people feel belittled, they tend not to offer their loyalty. Instead, they anticipate the opportune moment to withdraw their support. This very arrogance directly contributed to his subsequent downfall. When Lenin's testament, which explicitly called for Stalin's removal, was finally presented at the 13th Party Congress in May 1924, a document that clearly advocated for Stalin's dismissal, Trotsky remained silent. He offered no spoken objection. His apparent rationale was that raising the issue would portray him as divisive at a time when party unity needed to be emphasized. While this reasoning is understandable, it was fundamentally misguided. That was his critical opportunity. It was the sole window where Lenin's own institutional authority could have been leveraged to undermine Stalin's standing. Trotsky failed to seize that chance. Meanwhile, Zinoviev and Kamenev, who were theoretically opposed to Stalin, advocated for Stalin to retain his position as general secretary because they required his assistance in excluding Trotsky. The Central Committee decided to completely withhold the testament. Stalin then offered to step down from his post. His resignation was declined. He was reinstated before the meeting concluded. Let's examine why his silence proved so detrimental. Trotsky lacked a solid political foundation to rely upon. He was instrumental in establishing the Red Army, but commanding the military did not equate to controlling the party. Over 3 years, Stalin had strategically appointed men loyal to him to every available post. During that same period, Trotsky was occupied with writing and theorizing, and maintained a distance from the very individuals he needed for support. Anatoly Lunacharsky, a senior Bolshevik who had known Trotsky for many years, noted his significant weakness in organization not just for the party, but even for a small faction within it, remarking that he had virtually no devoted followers. He captivated people through his intellect. Unlike Stalin, who built his support through persistent effort, reciprocal obligations, and quiet cultivation, Trotsky did not foster personal loyalty in the same way. Underlying all these missteps was a pervasive attitude that linked them together. Trotsky failed to perceive Stalin as a genuine threat. He dismissively referred to him as a faceless bureaucrat. This attitude communicated to everyone who paid attention that Stalin was not worthy of serious intellectual consideration. This disdain prevented him from recognizing Stalin's actual strategic maneuvers. While Trotsky underestimated him as a mediocre figure, Stalin was diligently filling party congresses with his own supporters, forming alliances with no intention of upholding them, and crafting a narrative of Lenin's legacy that positioned himself as the rightful successor. His arrogance led to his carelessness. That carelessness resulted in his isolation. This isolation meant that when the critical moment arrived to resist, he had no one standing beside him. Trotsky possessed influence. Stalin commanded people, and in the realm of politics, it is people who ultimately prevail. By 1926, the situation had become increasingly dire. Zinoviev and Kamenev, the very individuals who had aided Stalin in suppressing the testament, marginalizing Trotsky, and solidifying his power, finally grasped the reality of what had transpired. They understood that Stalin had manipulated them. They then turned to Trotsky, forming what became known as the United Opposition. However, it was too late. Stalin exploited Lenin's 1921 prohibition against internal party factions, a rule established to maintain party unity, as the means to remove them. He accused Trotsky, Zinoviev, and Kamenev of forming an illicit faction opposing the party. In November 1927, all three were expelled from the Communist Party. In January 1928, Trotsky was exiled to Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan. In February 1929, he was expelled entirely from the Soviet Union. The mastermind behind the Red Army, the co-leader of the October Revolution, the individual Lenin described as the most competent member of the Central Committee, gone. He spent years moving through various countries, including Turkey, France, and Norway. Nation after nation either denied him entry or succumbed to Soviet pressure to deport him. His sons faced persecution, and his former colleagues were arrested, subjected to public trials, and executed. In 1936, Mexico granted him political asylum, where he resided, continuing his writing, organizing efforts, and warning the world about Stalin's actions against the revolution. Stalin never ceased his pursuit of him. In May 1940, armed individuals raided Trotsky's heavily fortified residence in Coyoacán, a suburb of Mexico City. His 14-year-old grandson sustained a gunshot wound to the foot. Trotsky survived the initial attack. However, 3 months later, he did not. On the afternoon of August 20th, 1940, a man named Ramon Mercader, a Spanish NKVD agent who had spent months embedding himself within Trotsky's inner circle, under a fabricated identity, sat with him in his private study, ostensibly to review a document. He then produced an ice axe concealed beneath his raincoat. Trotsky survived the initial impact of the blow. He actively defended himself. He bit Mercator's hand and, even while bleeding profusely, instructed his bodyguards to apprehend the assailant alive. He desired that the man be interrogated. He passed away the following day, August 21st, 1940. He was 60 years old at the time of his death. An estimated 300,000 individuals paid their respects at his casket in Mexico City during the subsequent days. The core message of this narrative lies in the following. Trotsky firmly believed that ideas were the driving force of history, asserting that the correct argument and a proper understanding of Marxist theory would ultimately dictate who shaped the future. He was a figure forged for revolutionary upheaval. Stalin, conversely, understood a different principle. He recognized that control was the primary driver of history, emphasizing that the clarity of one's vision was irrelevant. If one couldn't strategically place loyal individuals in key positions, suppress documents that posed a threat, and render potential challengers either dependent or fearful, he was a figure built for intricate systems. The most challenging aspect of this account is that Trotsky's ideological positions were not incorrect. Many of his predictions regarding Stalin's trajectory for the Soviet Union proved to be accurate. The bureaucratic authoritarianism he had feared ultimately materialized. His insights were valid. His predictions were correct. And despite this, he ultimately lost. This is because intellectual acuity is not synonymous with political power. Furthermore, possessing an accurate analysis of a given situation does not automatically grant one the capacity to influence or direct that situation. Yet, he still didn't win. This is because smarts differ from might. For the reason that understanding a scenario correctly doesn't automatically grant you command over it. Because in 1924, whether in Moscow or any other location, politics doesn't favor the individual who is precisely right. It elevates the person who is most ready. Trotsky was primed to spearhead a revolution. He wasn't geared up for the lesser, more drawn-out, unpleasant struggle that ensued. Stalin was. For Trotsky's assassination, Ramon Mercator spent 19 years and 8 months incarcerated in a Mexican penitentiary. He consistently concealed his genuine identity throughout that entire period. Following his freedom in 1960, he received the Order of Lenin and was honored as a hero of the Soviet Union. The very ice axe employed to slay Leon Trotsky is presently exhibited at the International Spy Museum situated in Washington, D.C. A faint trace of rust, originating from the killer's crimson fingerprint, remains observable on the implement. Trotsky's former residence in Coyoacán, the secured complex where his demise occurred, has now been transformed into a public exhibition space. Stalin's name is absent from any mention there. Had Trotsky accepted Lenin's proposal for the deputy leadership role? Had he attended Lenin's burial ceremony? Had he insisted openly for the complete reading of the Testament? Had he dedicated even a sliver of the effort he invested in writing towards cultivating alliances within the party apparatus he needed to influence? The course of history would appear altered. However, he did not, and it remains unchanged. That, possibly, is the most somber takeaway from this narrative. The most perilous individual present is seldom the exceptionally intelligent one. It's the person who has been discreetly ensuring everyone else in the vicinity already feels indebted to them.